Lesson 1. American History. The Colonial Period and Independence. This lesson discusses the colonial period of the United States and how the 13 original colonies won independence from Great Britain. The colonial period is from the early 1600s, when the first European settlements were created in North America, until 1776, the year the 13 original colonies declared their independence from Great Britain. The lesson is divided into 4 sections. The Colonial Period and Independence, Section 1. We will now begin the first section of Lesson 1. Christopher Columbus was an Italian navigator and explorer. For centuries, Europe bought spices and beautiful fabrics from Asia. However, the eastern trade routes were very long. Columbus believed that if he sailed west, he could reach India and China more quickly. Many people did not believe Columbus, but in 1492, Columbus convinced the King and Queen of Spain to give him 3 ships to try to find a faster route to Asia. On this map, the black arrows show the traditional route from Europe to India around Africa. The yellow arrow shows the route Columbus used to try to get to Asia more quickly by sailing west instead of east. Columbus, of course, did not find a shorter route to Asia. Instead, he landed in the Bahamas and thus discovered America. However, as this painting shows, people were already living here when Columbus arrived. These people are now known as Native Americans or American Indians. Even though people were already living in the Americas, Europeans quickly settled in what they called the New World and honored Columbus with a holiday. Although a holiday in other countries for many years, Columbus Day wasn't made a U.S. national holiday until 1937. In the early 1600s, people from several European countries began founding colonies in America. However, most of the colonies in North America were created by British settlers. These colonists came to America for freedom, an idea that includes political liberty, religious freedom so they could practice their religion, and economic opportunity. Colonists also came to escape persecution. In 1607, the first permanent British colony was created in Virginia. Most members of that colony came for economic reasons. The second successful British colony was in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Plymouth was started by pilgrims who came here for religious freedom and to escape persecution. These pilgrims sailed to Plymouth on the Mayflower in 1620. Although Europeans came to America in search of freedom, at the same time, tens of thousands of people from Africa were brought here and forced to work without pay or rights of any kind. These people were called slaves. By the end of the colonial period, over 300,000 Africans had been brought to America as slaves. This advertisement for a slave auction was placed in a Charleston, South Carolina newspaper in 1760. This is the end of Section 1. We will now practice the related civics questions. Question 58. What is one reason colonists came to America? Freedom. Colonists came to America for freedom. This idea includes political liberty, religious freedom, economic opportunity, to practice their religion, and to escape persecution. Question 59. Who lived in America before the Europeans arrived? American Indians. Before the Europeans arrived, American Indians, or Native Americans, lived in America. Question 60. What group of people was taken to America and sold as slaves. Africans. Africans, or people from Africa, were taken to America and sold as slaves. Section 2. The Colonial Period and Independence. We will now begin the second section of Lesson 1. Native American tribes can be found in all 50 states. In total, there are currently over 500 Native American tribes in the United States. Two of the largest tribes in Connecticut are the Mohegan and the Pequot. Two other well-known tribes in the U.S. are the Cherokee and the Crow. As mentioned earlier, Native Americans were already living in America before Europeans arrived. Not surprisingly, relations between the colonists and American Indians were not always friendly. Both colonists and Native Americans often attacked each other's villages, and as more colonists came to America, violence became more common. Eventually, as the U.S. expanded farther and farther west, many Native Americans were forced to leave their original homes and move to separate areas called reservations. Despite these tensions, the most famous story of peaceful relations between colonists and Native Americans helped create the national holiday of Thanksgiving. In 1620, 102 English pilgrims sailed over on the Mayflower. They landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts in late fall and had very little food. That winter, half of the pilgrims died. However, in spring, Native Americans taught the pilgrims how to farm and catch fish, and as a result, they had a successful harvest their first year. In thanks, the pilgrims invited the Native Americans to a feast. This is considered by many to be the first Thanksgiving in America. Still, Thanksgiving did not become a national holiday until the Civil War, when, in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln made Thanksgiving a national holiday to be observed every November. By the end of the colonial period, there were 13 colonies along the east coast of America. Later, when the colonies declared independence from Great Britain, the 13 colonies became the 13 original states. At that time, New England had only 4 states: Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. The last 2 New England states, Vermont and Maine, were created later. From north to south, the 13 original states were New Hampshire, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. This is the end of Section 2. We will now practice the related civics questions. Question 64. There were 13 original states. Name 3. Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island are 3 of the original 13 states. All 3 are next to each other. The other original states are New Hampshire, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Question 87. Name 1 American Indian tribe in the United States. Mohegan. The Mohegan tribe is one of the largest tribes in Connecticut. This slide has the names of 25 American Indian tribes, including 3 others mentioned in this lesson: the Cherokee, the Crow, and another Connecticut tribe, the Pequot. Section 3. The Colonial Period and Independence. We will now begin the 3rd section of Lesson 1. During the colonial period, Great Britain was ruled by a king and a parliament. The king, King George III, was the country's ruler. He was not elected. Instead, he inherited his power from his parents. Britain also had a parliament similar to the U.S. Congress, but few British and no American colonists had representation in the parliament. This lack of representation would become one of the biggest reasons Americans would declare independence from Great Britain. During the colonial period, there were a series of wars between Great Britain and France. The wars were fought in both Europe and North America. To help pay for these wars, Great Britain increased taxes on the colonists. However, since the American colonists had no representation in Parliament, they complained that this was taxation without representation, and therefore unfair. The colonists wanted self-government and more control over their own laws and basic rights. When a tax was placed on British tea in 1773, many colonists stopped buying British tea. Later that year, some colonists in Massachusetts protested by throwing 3 boatloads of tea into Boston Harbor. This event is now known as the Boston Tea Party. After the Boston Tea Party, relations between the colonists and Great Britain continued to worsen. The next year, the British Parliament put Massachusetts under direct British control and allowed British troops to live in people's houses. This was called quartering. Protests continued, and the next year the British attacked 2 towns outside of Boston. Thus began the Revolutionary War. At this time, Great Britain had the largest army and navy in the world. In contrast, America had no navy and only part-time state militias. George Washington had been a major during the French and Indian Wars, and in 1775 he was chosen to build and command a national American army. It was a very difficult job to build an army, but Washington proved an excellent leader and helped lead this young army to victory and the nation to independence. This is the end of Section 3. We will now practice the related civics question. Question 61. Why did the colonists fight the British? Because of high taxes. The colonists fought the British because of high taxes, also called taxation without representation. 2 other reasons are the British Army stayed in their houses, called quartering, and because the colonists did not have self-government. Section 4. The Colonial Period and Independence. We will now begin the 4th section of Lesson 1. In 1776, 2 years after the Revolutionary War began, the colonial government asked each of the 13 original colonies to create a state government, independent from Great Britain. This made it necessary for the 13 original colonies to declare their independence from Great Britain. Virginia Representative Thomas Jefferson was chosen to write a declaration, and on July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted by the colonial government. The United States had been born. Like Columbus Day, the 4th of July is now a national holiday. The 4th of July is also known as Independence Day. The Declaration of Independence begins by stating the self-evident truth that all men are created equal, and identifies certain natural and inherent rights and freedoms, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration then lists 27 complaints against King George and the British Parliament, and explains how the colonies were denied many basic rights, including the right to self-government. The men who helped write and signed the Declaration of Independence are considered some of America's founding fathers. This group includes Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. Two other founding fathers, George Washington and James Madison, did not sign the Declaration of Independence, but after the Revolutionary War, they helped write the U.S. Constitution. Benjamin Franklin was one of the most important founding fathers. He was a U.S. diplomat, the first Postmaster General of the United States, and the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention. He also started the first free libraries and wrote Poor Richard's Almanac. Poor Richard's Almanac was a mix of practical information such as weather forecasts and household tips, and amusing stories, poems, puzzles, and proverbs. Benjamin Franklin is sometimes referred to as the first American because he was one of the first people to talk about the need for colonial unity. This drawing is the first political cartoon to appear in an American newspaper. Franklin drew it in 1754 during the French and Indian War to urge the 13 colonies to form one government for defense and other general important purposes. The cartoon was then used again during the Revolutionary War for the same purpose. The 13 states could beat the British only by fighting together. It was not always easy to get them to do so, but by fighting together, the states began to see themselves as members of a single nation instead of a group of separate states. Great Britain fought the colonists throughout the 13 states. The American Army lost so many battles during the first 2 years that the soldiers were losing hope. There was a real danger George Washington might lose control of his army. He desperately needed a victory to boost the morale of his soldiers. So in the winter of 1776, Washington made a bold decision. He crossed the Delaware River and made a surprise attack on troops quartered in Trenton, New Jersey. The Americans won the battle, and that victory helped restore the morale of the American army. However, even with this victory, it was clear that the United States couldn't win the war alone. The nation needed help from other countries. At this time, Benjamin Franklin was the U.S. ambassador to France. Along with Thomas Jefferson, he helped convince the French to join the United States in its fight for independence against Great Britain. Later, both Spain and Holland also agreed to help fight the British. With these European countries now helping the Americans, Britain knew it could not win the war. Then, in 1781, after a series of battles, a large British force surrendered in Yorktown, Virginia, essentially ending the war. In this painting, George Washington is accepting the surrender of the British General Cornwallis. George Washington was U.S. commander during the Revolutionary War and the country's first president. For these reasons, George Washington is considered the father of our country. Like others who either signed the Declaration of Independence or helped write the U.S. Constitution, George Washington is also considered a founding father. He was so important during the creation of the United States that he became known as the indispensable man. This is the end of Section 4. We will now practice the related civics questions. Question 8. What did the Declaration of Independence do? announced our independence. The Declaration of Independence announced our independence from Great Britain. Declared our independence from Great Britain. Said that the United States is free from Great Britain. Question 9. What are two rights in the Declaration of Independence? Life and liberty. Some rights in the Declaration of Independence include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Question 62. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Question 63. When was the Declaration of Independence adopted? July 4th, 1776. The Declaration of Independence was adopted on July 4th, 1776. Question 68. What was one thing Benjamin Franklin is famous for? Benjamin Franklin is famous for being a U.S. diplomat. He was also the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention, the first Postmaster General of the United States, the writer of Poor Richard's Almanac, and he started the first free libraries. Question 69. Who is the father of our country? Washington. The father of our country is George Washington. Question 99. When do we celebrate Independence Day? July 4. We celebrate Independence Day on July 4. Question 100. Name two national U.S. holidays. Independence Day and Thanksgiving. Independence Day and Thanksgiving are two of the national U.S. holidays from this lesson. The other holiday from this lesson is Columbus Day. Other holidays will be discussed in later lessons. This is the end of Lesson 1.